Hello, bonjour. My name is Niki Ashton. As the tax fairness critic for the NDP, the critic for the CRA, I am here standing with independent Jewish voices and thousands of Canadians calling on the Government of Canada to investigate the reported use of Canadian tax dollars funding illegal Israeli settlers, settlements, and their systemic attacks on and the displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. This is a shocking reality. It is also shocking that it's been weeks since we sent a letter to the minister in charge of the CRA asking for action on this, and we have heard nothing. Today, you will hear from independent Jewish voices who, along with others, have been leading this work. You will also hear from Professor Miles Howe, who's also involved with independent Jewish voices, on his shocking findings on the use of charitable tax status here in Canada and the death and destruction we are seeing in Palestine. Let me be clear. We need to end Canada's complicity. The CRA minister has an obligation to ensure that Canadian charities are allowed to offer tax receipts when they follow the rules set out by the Income Tax Act and adhere to standards set out in international law. This is not happening. Our team brought this to the attention of the Liberal government weeks ago in a letter. We have also sponsored a petition with over 10,000 Canadians who signed it. But we have yet to hear a response to this date. I am calling on the CRA minister to investigate any and all Canadian-based charity organizations possibly involved in war crimes and violations of international law. Their charitable status must be revoked if they are found to be in violation. Let's be clear. Canadians are horrified by what they're seeing unfold in Gaza. They are increasingly concerned, distraught by what they're hearing about what's happening in the West Bank. Canadians do not support the use of Canadian tax dollars for groups that are anything other than charitable. Canadians do not support the blocking of aid trucks heading to Gaza. Canadians do not support the settlements of extremist finance minister and the Israeli government, Minister Smotrich and Daniel Weiss, who have vowed to violently move Palestinians out of Gaza and the West Bank and let Israeli settlers in. Canadians do not support the planting of Israeli flags in Gaza. Canadians don't support the buying of drones for the Israeli army with, quote, thermal capabilities. Canada has a proud history of being a voice for peace, for diplomacy, for justice, including in the past in the Middle East. But in recent months, we've seen troubling statements from Prime Minister Trudeau, who took quite some time to join much of the world in calling for a ceasefire, whose government took much time to go after only 4 individuals when it came to potential action on those engaged in illegal settlements in the West Bank. Took quite some time to acknowledge the heinous attacks, murders in Rafah, in Gaza, over the last weeks and even months. Canadians are horrified. And I believe that Canadians, many of whom regularly give to charities and receive a tax receipt as a result, would like to know that the Canadian government is taking this issue very seriously, shutting down any so-called charities engaged in illegal acts, violations of illegal law, and war crimes, and that Canada is part of the solution when it comes to building peace and justice in Palestine and Israel. This is a time for Canada to show leadership. This is a time for Prime Minister Trudeau, a leader who in the past has claimed to want to be seen as a leading voice on the world stage, including on multilateralism. This is a time for Trudeau to say that he will end Canada's complicity by doing everything possible when it comes to a permanent ceasefire, by doing everything possible to bring in a two-way arms embargo, by doing everything possible to take the step, as many other countries have done, to recognize a Palestinian state, but also by making sure our house is in order and that the CRA is not giving charitable donations to so-called organizations that have no business to be seen as charities, and certainly supported through the work of Canadians across this country. So finally, we are here today calling on Prime Minister Trudeau to do the right thing, to investigate and shut down charities involved in illegal activity in Gaza and the West Bank, to shut down charities that are engaging in violations of international law. Today, we are clear. Not 1 cent of Canadian tax dollars should be going to fund genocide. At this point, I'd like to call on Corey Balsam, the president of Independent Jewish Voices.
Thank you, MP Ashton. My name is Corey Balsam. I'm the national coordinator of Independent Jewish Voices, which is a national grassroots organization with 23 chapters across the country in cities, regions, and on university campuses from coast to coast to coast. As Jews, many of us of Israeli origin, many of us descendant from Holocaust survivors, we feel a particular sense of responsibility to stand up against the reprehensible crimes being perpetrated in our name by the State of Israel. Yet we say not in our names, not just as Jews, but also as Canadians, on account of Canada's deep complicity with Israel's crimes. This complicity comes in many forms, from the arms trade to the suppression of speech on Palestine through false accusations of anti-Semitism, for example. It also comes through taxpayer-subsidized charitable donations to Israeli organizations, several of whom are directly and deeply implicated in Israeli war crimes. Through one organization, just one of these, Mizrahi Canada, Canadians can donate to radical settler group Women in Green, which has an ongoing fundraising campaign entitled Demolish, Enter, Remain in Gaza. They can donate to Im Tirtzu, which publicly brags about participating in blockading aid trucks getting into Gaza, which could be Canadian aid as well. You can go to their website and you can click, donate in charitable funds, and it'll take you to this Mizrahi Canada website to donate. They can donate to an undercover IDF unit known for assassinating Palestinians, the Duvdevan unit. They can even donate directly to the illegal West Bank settlement of Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, as another example. And you can get tax breaks for doing that, subsidized by the rest of us, including Palestinian Canadians. Let that sink in a little bit. It's now been 2 months since IJV, along with Miles Howe, who you hear from in a minute, and Just Peace Advocates, sent a public letter to the Minister of National Revenue, Marie-Claude Bibeau. This letter follows decades of official complaints from our organizations with hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of incriminating evidence about organizations like Mizrahi Canada, like the Jewish National Fund of Canada, like the Ne'eman Foundation. There's a long list. Yet despite the mountain of evidence showing these organizations violating Canadian law, these organizations continue to get off scot-free by successive liberal and conservative governments. This is not just a few bad apples. This is a systemic issue that requires systemic solutions to make sure that, as MP Ashton rightly stated, not 1 cent of Canadian tax dollars goes to funding genocide, to make sure that not 1 cent of Canadian taxpayer subsidized funds goes to groups implicated in settlements and the violent dispossession of Palestinians. Minister Bibeau, the time for action is now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the brass tacks of this one particular issue, this one particular charity, Mizrahi Organization of Canada. And what I'm going to tell you, interestingly enough, is not new, especially to the Liberal government of Canada. Fronted by complaints issued by Just Peace advocates, among other groups, the minister and the CRA has known about this issue since at least 2022. So we're not dealing with a context of months, we're dealing with a context of years of inaction. First and foremost, let me explain how Mizrahi Organization of Canada works to finance these settlements and other egregious so-called Israeli charities in Israel. There's a website called jgive.com, which is legally registered to an organization called the Asor Fund. jgive.com offers something of a clearinghouse. Consider or imagine a GoFundMe campaign if it was a multitude of these, and they're all Israeli charities. So it runs the gamuts from synagogues in need of a new roof, yeshivas, etc. Some of these certainly are based in Israel proper. Many of these are also based within the occupied territories and actually are registered charities in Israel, which are operating illegally in the settlements, and others operate directly towards Palestinian erasure and displacement. When you click on one of these charities as a Canadian to donate, you are given the option to donate in Canadian funds. And what you are also given the option to do is receive a charitable tax receipt from Mizrahi Canada. And so Mizrahi right here is operating in contravention of Section 168(1)(f) of the Income Tax Act. It's operating as a direct conduit, as a directed giving context for charities over which it has no direction or control. The second red flag that should have appeared is that between 2007 and 2021, in its Schedule 2 overseas activity, under which Canadian charities are required to list their international intermediaries, Mizrahi Canada moved $46 million plus into Israel and listed properly donations received by name and dollar amount for under $600,000 of that. So 44 point something million dollars simply was earmarked as going to Israel without a name and recipient attached to it. Red flag number 2. In 2022, Mizrahi of Canada changes it up and actually files its Schedule 2 overseas activity properly. It lists just shy of 300 Israeli charitable recipients, and it's here where you can begin to dig into exactly where this money is going. You have 28 recipients within the settlements in contravention of Canadian public policy, which you can find openly and publicly on the Global Affairs website. And the CRA is very clear in a summary policy statement that Canadian charities must not act in contravention of Canadian public policy, even if it's not listed as something illegal under Canadian law. Red flag number, where am I, 3 or 4 here at this point? If we move basically away from the limited context of the Income Tax Act and the apparently inability or perhaps complicity of the CRA and Minister Bibeau to act on this, what we find is there's a direct contravention here of international law. The Geneva Conventions, the Rome Statutes, and the Hague Convention, of which Canada is a signatory, does not acknowledge these, acknowledges the Israeli settlements as a war crime. We also have a Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act within Canada, which we should consider within the context, as Corey was mentioning, of charities such as Im Tirtzu, which are directly self-congratulating themselves for turning away aid trucks to Gaza, and for whom Mizrahi Organization of Canada issued a charitable tax receipt in 2022. This is not only egregious, it besmirches the entire Canadian charitable sector, which lives and dies upon its reputation, and upwards of 10% of people in Canada are employed by the NGO sector. So what we're dealing with here is a mountain of red flags, not only under the limited context of the Income Tax Act, but we're putting Canada in a state, as a state, where we potentially find ourselves open to other national interventions within the ICJ, and we see Mizrahi Organization of Canada as potentially within the criminal code open to proceedings under the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. The call is long overdue for this charity to be investigated fully, for this charity to feel the letter of the law of the Income Tax Act, and for the entire Canada to Israel charitable sector, which is worth upwards of $278 million per year on average between 2018 and 2022, to be deeply investigated, because this is not the only instance, and this is simply the most egregious. Again, I'll reiterate, the CRA and the minister have known about this for years. This is nothing new. It shouldn't take us the context of a genocide. It shouldn't take us the context of 40,000 Palestinians dead in Gaza to wake up to this urgent issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miles. You've heard very clearly from Professor Miles Howe about how serious the situation is, about his findings, and you've also heard from Corey Balsam on behalf of Independent Jewish Voices, who for over a couple of months now has been waiting for Minister Bibeau to respond, and the same goes for our office as well. Today we are calling on Minister Bibeau to take action, to investigate and shut down charities who are engaged in illegal activity that is not in line with Canadian policy, not in line with the Income Tax Act. And we are also fundamentally calling on Prime Minister Trudeau and Canada to show leadership, take a stand for peace, security, and justice in Israel and Palestine now.